friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And today I wanted to talk about why bother, or what's the point. And this is stuff I've kind of talked about in the past, but I recently got what was actually a really rude troll comment. But it got me thinking about the fact that I'm sure there's people that have some of these different questions as to why we do some of the things we do. And if you've been following us for any length of time, you will know that we are partially off-grid. We are still on public power, but we also have solar panels, plus a backup gas generator, plus many other things that we do that require no power at all. You know, whether it be things that are foot operated, such as my treadle machine, or hand operated, such as using the brake bleeder pump for vacuum sealing, or the hand beater instead of using an electric beater, and various things like that. And this question came in on one of the older videos that was from at least 3, maybe 4 years ago now, I don't remember how long ago it was, that Patrick had built at my request my off-grid laundry setup. And before that, I had done a video trying out using a mop bucket for doing laundry. Now, yes, we have an electric washing machine and dryer, and the washing machine runs off of our solar power most of the year, and then most of the year I'm hanging the clothes to dry, but I have the dryer as backup for those days where it's too wet to hang the clothes outside but too warm to build a fire inside. So there are days that the dryer does get used. And so the dryer is our backup, but the off-grid laundry setup is the backup for the washing machine, since we can run the electric machine on the solar power most of the year. And we also have public power as well. Whether this person was just looking for an excuse to be rude, I'm not going to repeat anything that they said, or they really were wondering why someone would go through the trouble of having an off-grid setup where you're washing the clothes by hand in a tub and then wringing them out with the wringer or even by hand. Back when I did the video on the mop bucket, again, that was me doing just a trial to see. We found this mop bucket that was brand new for $1 at a garage sale. So I bought it because I wanted to try washing clothes with it. And as I explained in that video and another one I did after that, the point of that was not to make more work for myself, but to try to experiment with different ways that in case my washing machine broke down, or we had an extended public power outage and it was in the middle of winter where we're not getting very much solar power collection, I needed to know I had a good and effective way to wash the clothes without using any kind of power. And that's why I had Patrick put me together that setup. That washing machine that I was using at the time, the electric one, was pretty old, and Patrick has fixed it on a couple of different occasions, but it finally up and died on us, and Patrick tried fixing it, replacing the motor, he tried replacing a couple other parts. It did nothing to fix the problem. It just was wore out, and it was time to replace it. And so yes, we did order up a new machine. But because of certain circumstances going on in the world, it took 6 weeks for that machine to get here. So during that time, I had to fall back on the off-grid setup. And I was more than grateful at that time that I had it. And that right there was the very reason why I had Patrick do that. Why I had been experimenting with the mop bucket before we put together that other setup, because I needed to know I had an effective way to wash the clothes, and I wanted to get experience with it. I wanted to practice a little bit. I didn't want to just get something and then fall back on it when I absolutely had to and realize, wow, this isn't going to work very good for me. Most of you, I'm sure, that follow us already know why we do what we do, but some people probably wonder, well, why would you bother getting a hand crank grain mill, have an off-grid laundry setup, or have a treadle machine if you at least have solar power? Why go through all that work and trouble? Well, as I explained, you know, where we live, it rains pretty much 9 months out of the year. And so even with our solar power, even though we can use it somewhat through the winter, we have to really limit what we can do. So that is also why we like in the winter, our public power becomes our main source, and the solar power becomes our backup. And then during the summer, it switches where our solar power is our main source of power, and our public power is a backup. Because, you know, we do have parts in the house that aren't hooked up to solar, but most of what we do, all the main things that we do are set up in Pat's shop and in the house to run off our solar power. But we cannot depend on it year round. And we also understand that there's other things that could happen that could prevent us being able to use the solar power. So thus we also have a gas generator as backup. But that is also why we have other setups. So one of the first things that I got when I needed a new sewing machine again, and this is when I was still teaching dance and making costumes, I decided I'm not buying another cheap electric machine. It's going to break down within 2 years. I want a treadle machine. I already had the table, and that was one of the best purchases I ever made. I love that machine, and I have used it for, I think it might be 8 years now that I've been using it straight, and it's served me well, better than any machine that I've ever had. And I never have to worry about needing electricity to run it. It doesn't matter if the solar power is low. It doesn't matter if we're having one of the many power outages that we have throughout the year. I can still sew, no problem. I have a lot of videos I have a video about our lighting, what we use for lighting most of the year. These lights I have on in here, I only turn them on when I'm shooting videos. Most of the time I use other forms of lighting that either require very little electricity or run off our solar power all year round, or things like oil lanterns and gas lanterns and candles and LED lights. Here are some other things. We also have a rainwater collection set up. That's actually our main source of water for consuming. We don't consume city water at all, even though, yes, they finally took the fluoride out after years of trying to get them to do this. Yay, I'm so glad. But still, there's other chemicals in the water that are best not to consume. So that was the main reason why we set up that. But it also becomes a backup source for water as well, because sometimes the water has to get shut off. I could hardly care less about having public power available, but water is important. So again, another backup source, because it's really frustrating when they have to fix a main break. You know, before we had this set up and they shut off the water to the whole neighborhood, you can't wash your dishes, you can't make coffee or tea or wash your clothes or take a shower or even flush your toilet more than once. So for those of you who are just like trying to grasp it, you might understand the idea of preparedness, putting up food, you know, maybe even having a backup power source, but why bother having an off-grid setup when you have solar power and public electricity? Why have something like that? I can see why that would be hard to understand. You know, why would you make more work for yourself? Well, again, it's for those times when anything can happen, like your washing machine up and dying and it taking 6 weeks to get a new one. And I'm not going to let the laundry pile up for 6 weeks. It falls in the same line. Like, why would you bother learning how to darn socks when you can just, once your socks wear out, you can just go buy a new pair? Well, part of that obviously is going to be about being frugal. But the other part is, what if you can't go buy a new pair of socks? What if either A, you just don't have the funds because of whatever situation you were thrown into, some kind of family crisis, a job loss, whatever it be, and you don't have the money to go out and buy a new pair of socks, or those new pair of socks are unavailable because for whatever reason the whole store is shut down and they won't let you buy anything. Is it possible we might have seen these kind of things happen recently? Absolutely. I saw in places where certain parts of stores were open, but you couldn't buy cooking utensils, for crying out loud. But the restaurants were also shut down. So let me think about this. You can't go out to eat, but if you don't already have the cooking utensils you need at home to cook your own meals, now you're not allowed to even buy those. We've seen that happen, and it's stupid. So who knows if something will happen, and buying a new pair of socks isn't available to you. You're going to want to know how to darn your own socks. So it also is important to learn the skills and to have the things on hand to repair such things, such as some good sock weight yarn and a couple of yarn needles. It's also important to know how to do other things, like how to repair clothing with your sewing machine. And obviously learning how to cook and bake, even if you could afford to eat out every day in the week, and that's something you would prefer to do. Again, let's come back to the fact that in a lot of places, some people can't go out to eat at all and all the restaurants are closed down. Now what do? You don't know how to cook, you don't have cooking utensils, you don't have backup cooking sources in case they decide to shut your power off too. What are you gonna do? So it's just thinking about these things. And I realize there's a lot of different things to think about, and sometimes until we're thrown into that situation, example being a year ago when nobody could get toilet paper because all the shelves were bare of toilet paper. That wasn't an issue with us for a couple of reasons. One, because I've always been well stocked with about 2 years worth of toilet paper on hand. Plus, making that change to entirely cloth meant the toilet paper we have is pretty much just for company. And so we can make a package of toilet paper last for a very, very long time. And that is why through the years, not only did I try to learn new skills, but try to think of other and better ways to do things. Even if I wasn't going to use it right away, I wanted something as a backup just in case something happened. And that something has happened many times over, not just because of 2020, but even because of various other situations. And before all that, Patrick and I were thrown into different situations. We would go through phases where, money was doing really good, and then money was really tight, and then money was really good, and then money was really tight. And I'm sure a lot of people can say they've been through the same thing. It's like this roller coaster. Life is good, then life is hard, and then life is good, and then life is hard. And when life is good, that is when you start preparing for when you go to the bottom of that roller coaster and times are hard. And then when times are good again, you restock, you relearn, you do whatever it is you need to do to get more prepared. Because usually during this down times is also when we learn the most about what we need and how tough we are, what we can handle, what we can put up with, and what we can do without. And there's so many times through the past however many years that we've been doing this, I have been so grateful that I've taken the time to learn skills and to find ways to do things in another way that doesn't depend on somebody else. So it doesn't depend on the public power. It doesn't depend on the public water. It doesn't depend on me having to go to my neighbor and beg for help, or family for that matter. And I tell you, we've had our moments where it's like we had no idea what was going to happen next. We had no idea if next month we were going to be able to pay the bills. And those hard times really taught us a lot. And during some of those really hard times, because we were already set in certain other ways, we were able to make it through those hard times while also learning how to better our situation. So when the next hard time came, we were able to handle it. And when that time came, we learned even more. And that is why crazy people like us do what we do. And while I'm at it, let me go ahead and throw in the food storage thing. Why do people like us put up 1, 2, 3 years worth of food? For that same reason, because you never know what's going to happen. It doesn't mean it has to be a global or even country or even citywide catastrophe that makes you unable to get to the store to get food, such as, let's say, something as simple as like where we're at, we came pretty close one year to having both sides of the highway on either side of us blocked off. And if that would have happened, there would have been no commerce coming through. And that did happen another year previously, where we actually had a blizzard, which is rare in our area, come through and totally blocked off the highway on both sides, and the store shelves were getting bare and people were starting to freak out. And that was just our little town. Just our little town. That can happen to you, or it could be a simple grid down situation that only happens to you and your household. I have a family member, they had something go wrong in the power, in the wiring in their house, and shut the power off to the whole house. And they thought it would be an easy fix. It took, I think, at least a week to 2 weeks for them to finally get it fixed where they finally had power. And they thankfully at that time had a wood stove, and it was the middle of winter. And if they hadn't had that wood stove, they wouldn't have had any way to heat their house during that whole time, because they had absolutely no power. But because they have that wood stove, they had a way to heat their house and a way to cook their food. It's those kind of things, and a lot of times you don't think about it until it happens to you, because a lot of people look at people that do what we do and think we're just preparing for a polar shift or an EMP or something like that. No, for most of us, it's not about that. It's about just, we've already experienced hard times, we've been there, and we actually decided to learn through those hard times so that we could be ready during the next crisis that hit, even if it was only to us personally, because most of the crises that happened to us were all just here in our own little world. It didn't involve any of the neighbors, well, other than the constant power outages, because we have like 3, 4, sometimes 5 a year. That's just normal. And it always amazes me that there's people in my area that are not prepared for power outages. I'm still shocked at that one, but because that's just part of living in our area. Big winds, big trees, power outages happen. But anyway, it doesn't have to be about a big, massive, crazy conspiracy theory thing. It could be something simple and unexpected that happens to you. And that's why people like us do what we do. And that's why we take the time to learn through every hard situation and be prepared for the next time. And we're always grateful that we did. Oh yes, and one more thing. The other reason a lot of us do what we do, it's another way to be frugal, because when we put up food storage now, while the cost of it is lower, before it gets even higher, we're buying tomorrow's food at today's prices. We're canning the stuff from our garden or things that we buy in bulk, so that we can save money, so that we can do more of this kind of stuff, or have the money set aside for emergency situations. There used to be a time back before everybody had insurance that people just had an emergency cash fund. That was just the way it was. And now modern day Americans, that's something that just seems incomprehensible to most, because we're so used to the government taking care of us. And it's a mentality we need to get away from. All right, well, I'm going to close this video up, and I hope this was helpful and got some people to understand. Again, maybe it's just something you might want to share with people who are questioning you and why you're so crazy to do the things that you do. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.